It's all about the flaws in the Hillary Clinton campaign. And so there's all kinds of arguments. But the simple answer is on one level, or not so simple answer, is to say that checking in on public policy is not the job of the courts. That's the job of the American public. That's the job of Congress. And here, the best check on public policy of Trump is what? Trump himself. I mean, he doesn't have a vision. He doesn't have a policy agenda and doesn't know how to move things. His own ineptness is going to prevent him from getting anything done. I'm serious. I'm serious. I want to get new hands first before I come back to others. Yeah.
I had two questions.
If I'm moving on to the camera, okay.
The first one with respect to treason.
Ah.
The Constitution defines treason. And so, aid and comfort to the enemy, doesn't that presuppose that there must be a real enemy, as opposed to one that we could speculate was the Russians? We have to be almost at a time of war?
Perhaps. Perhaps.
And then, secondly, goes to the broader statement about faith in the system.
Yeah.
You have one party seemingly still trying to play by the rules. You have another party that basically obstructed an entire administration for 8 years, who seems to be motivated much more by the amount of money they can, how they can game the system, Operation Crosscheck, voter ID, now setting up a system to enrich the concept of voter ID. How can we, at the time of Watergate, you had a press that was interested in, worked under the Fairness Doctrine, and was more interested in arriving at truth, in terms of Walter Cronkite and the Washington Post, was it?
Washington Post, that's right.
And
under Ben Bradley.
right. So you had a system in place that was there checking the other systems of government. You had congressmen not necessarily going to get all their money, as much money as they need to run for re-election, and so therefore they don't have to pay attention to the electorate. That's what scares me, is that these things, the train seems to be coming off the rails.
Sure.
And in many aspects.
Right, okay. A couple of thoughts here. First, I remember after 9/11, when Hungry Mind the bookstore was still in business. And I gave it, and was it Dave Arnowski? I think it was the owner, asked me to come over and give a talk about post 9/11. And I started off by saying, fear and prejudice makes us do a lot of stupid things. That we've got this really great side of American politics that's wonderful, but we also have this ugly side that starts with the burning of witches in Salem, Massachusetts, that takes us through the McCarthy era, to Stonewall, to et cetera, et cetera. And the reason why I mention that is that I never want to downplay the fact that there is an ugly side to American politics, and that's unfortunate. And we have to recognize that. But the other thing, and maybe I'm too Pollyannish or something like that. I'm not one to panic myself. Is that again, my point of telling the story about the day after the election, coming out of care and saying to my wife, there are no tanks in the streets, there's no barbed wire up, is to say, guess what? The world's not going to end. That we survived Watergate. We figured out that we survived what? The Cold War. I don't know about you. I'm 59 years old. I grew up at a point where we shot John F. Kennedy. We shot Robert Kennedy. We killed Martin Luther King Jr. God, it was worse then than it is now. And so put things in perspective. I mean, I grew up out east. We burned half of the urban cores of the East Coast down. And I just say that because we too quickly let our fears grip us. And at some point we have to sort of say, take a deep breath and think through what are the ways that we can actually work through this process and the way to mobilize and do a variety of different things. And so I start off by saying that, yeah, I come back to, I absolutely agree that there are a lot of things wrong in our political system. There's no one silver bullet to fix any of them. The closest that I would come to a silver bullet is I come back to a quote that I'll give. from somebody else. Back in the 90s, I was the state president, executive director for Common Cause Minnesota. In 1998, the 25th anniversary of Watergate, I brought Archibald Cox to Minnesota to talk about the 25th anniversary of his firing. And I got to have the pleasure of having dinner with him. And I was talking to Archibald Cox about something, and he turned to me and he said, the rules on who can give money are the rules that determine the rules of the game. And I've always loved that statement because he said they decide how the game of politics is played. And to a large extent, if there's any one silver bullet, and again, I don't think there's any one silver bullet out there. The reasons why the media are not doing their job, they're multifaceted. But somewhere out there, the core issue is how do we get a grip on the role of money in politics in our political system? And that's where I think we need to concentrate. I think what's happening here, and I think you were sort of hitting at it here also, is that on one level, I said this during the Bush administration for many people too, that Democrats hyperventilate every time Bush did something, and I said, it's predictable. What he's able to do is to get you folks to hyperventilate and distract you from the eyes on the prize, distract you from really sort of doing the things that need to be done. Out here right now, I would argue, take us away from Trump, take us into politics in a different realm. One of the things I think the Democrats are doing fundamentally wrong right now is thinking, guess what? Trump is such a screw-up. We're going to win in 2018. Guess what? You still have to have what? A narrative, a message, an alternative, a candidate, a strategy. At the end of the day, give me 30 more seconds here. At the end of the day, where Trump was fundamentally correct, and I rarely will ever say something like this, is that in the last 40 years, the gap between the rich and the poor has accelerated dramatically. That both Democrats and Republicans have largely abandoned working class America. Clinton didn't have any proposals for working class America. Obama's policies, I would argue, largely ignored working class America also. If the Democrats think that Trump being a screw-up is enough to ensure their election in 2018, they're foolish. So to me, the eye on the prize is not to get distracted by everything he's doing, but is to say, what is the counter narrative? What is the counter proposal? What is the agenda and strategy that we have to take to be able to take control of power and to govern? And that's where I would put the focus. You know.
I work for a corporation where the head encourages people to write their 3 most important things, or their MITs, and start their day with their MITs every day.
Right.
And I'm going to ask you, what would we use as our MITs to affect the change here? Good question, right?
These are good questions here. First off, I always tell people, this is my criticism, okay, of local politics. I'm going to pick on St. Paul and Minneapolis politics right now. You don't run for mayor on a platform of world peace. And our candidates seem to want to talk about world peace. I worked in local government back in New York. Local government's about what? Streets, sidewalks, dogs, police, fire, et cetera, et cetera. So I say, first off, it's about, can you clean up your own part of the world? You know, can you concentrate in terms of what? Mobilizing locally, building the bases that you want to start within the world that you can actually control. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing that I would actually say in terms of things that we could do is it has to be about education. And I don't just mean talking about funding education, it's a different story entirely. It's going to be about educating ourselves. It's going to be about educating others. You know, because again, one of the things that we learned from 2016 are the enormous bubbles that we all live in. So that's the second thing, education. The third thing, as I say to my students all the time, is that simply liking something on Facebook doesn't mean doodly squat. Is that my students will say, well, I'm engaged, I follow things or like something on Facebook. I said, nobody cares. At the end of the day, you know, there is the notion of, guess what? As Woody Allen once said, 98% of life is showing up. That you have to show up. It's voting. It's showing up, whether it's the caucuses, whether it's showing up, whatever it is. It is door knocking, whatever you have to do. So none of these sound exciting because everybody wants to bring about world peace. But guess what? It's building in those small little areas that you can actually build and do something. So those would be on my list of the 3 things that I would do. Yeah, way back there.
So when you were talking a little bit about getting you know, House of Representatives on board with impeachment, and that feels like a pretty insurmountable thing right now, and they're not even taking your phone calls or coming to town halls, so all those types of things. Is our only choice really just to continue to put as much pressure on them as possible?
Yeah.
So phone calls, writing, marching, etc.
Yeah, it has to be. Because at some point, on one level, elected representatives are rational players. What do you mean by rational players? They want to get reelected. At some point, the calculus, the squeeze has to be there where they decide, guess what? That if I keep pursuing this particular strategy, I seriously run the risk of not getting reelected. Now, there's a whole bunch of districts across the country that Republicans are absolutely safe. You know, some of you've heard me on Almanac say this several times, that there's only about 20 to 25 seats in the House of Representatives that are truly swing. Okay, we can maybe explode it a little bit more in a great year, put it up to about 40 or something like that. But it's not a lot of seats. We have overwhelmingly Democratic, overwhelmingly Republican. But what the focus should be, if I were doing it, is saying, let's key in on those critical swing seats across the United States. You know, we can identify 20 or 25 or so seats, and we've got 2 of them in Minnesota, maybe 3. You know, now one of them, you know, maybe 4 actually at this point. You know, we've got you know, Waltz's. You know, we have the 8th district, we have the 2nd district, we have the 3rd district. Key in on especially, you know, Paulson's district. Key in on the 2nd district. And apply the pressure there, because those are the ones, they're probably at the end of the day, you're not going to change their minds.
Right.
But those are districts where what? You can put people out of office. And that's what you have to do. At some point, it's about what? It's about the electoral strategy. Now a lot of, you know, this is sort of my criticism from last year. My students at Hamline, you know, were ardent Bernie Sanders supporters. As many students were across the country, and 25,000 of them would show up at a rally, 40,000 show up at a rally, but they didn't show up to vote. And I would say to them, guess what? It doesn't matter if you hang out at a rally all day. You gotta show up and be counted. And so here at some point, it has to be the point of how do you exert the right strategies and squeeze to get people out of office and replace them in those swing districts.
So my follow-up then is, can we squeeze them on the impeachment issue?
My point is that, and the answer is yes. What it is, and then maybe it's partly on the impeachment. It's basically when Jason Lewis and Paulson, if they actually think they're going to lose because they're in support of Trump, that's when the calculus starts to change. Now, do I think the House is actually going to impeach him? No. But what will happen, I'm going to call it the equivalent of in England, where there's a vote of no confidence. You know, where you get to the point where it is clear that the House isn't going to support you when push comes to shove. That's the point where it's effectively as good as impeachment. I mean, think about it. All intents and purposes, Dixon was impeached and convicted. I mean, the pressures were there. He was ousted. Just didn't have to go through the actual process of doing it or something like that. So, pardon me?
No, I just.
Yeah. So that to me is like it's a squeezing process. Yeah.
Yeah, there is an organization called Swing Left.
Right.
And that's, I think, where this power is. And they're already starting activity, getting people to vote and sign up for their register and all that. And starting to put pressure on us. As that becomes more visible, I think that pressure will be seen by the representatives.
Right. But still, heed what I've been saying here. It's not just again enough to say Trump's screwing up.
No.
The Democrats have to offer the alternative vision, and strategy. The argument for why they should be elected. Because otherwise, what I think is going to happen in 2018 is nobody shows up to vote. Okay.
So I get this, I worked for a CEO before, and I see this
Yeah.
kind of pattern with Trump, where
Uh-huh.
it's stirring up the pot, stirring up the pot,
Yeah.
stirring up the pot. We're all focused on this impeachment, okay?
Right.
But what's flying under the radar while we're sitting there being focused on that? Because we've got we've got a media merger thing going on where 70% of our media is gonna be controlled by, our local media is gonna be controlled by one company. You know, they're trying to pass a law where there's not gonna be any more overtime paid.
I know.
And so we're sitting here so preoccupied with this impeachment, when in order to really stand up, we need to stop what's going on within our info structure, because there's all kinds of stuff that we're not paying attention to because we're looking at what he's doing with Russians.
Yeah, I think you make a very,
He's making a mess.
Yeah.
He's taking advantage of that.
you make a very good point. It's my whole point about diversions and people getting hot and bothered about certain things. You know, it's like, again, you know, I look at, you know, I've just about blocked out most of the timeline on Facebook now because I've gotten tired of sort of, people just sort of, again, hyperventilating about absolutely everything. Yeah, what's happening with Russia is important, but there's no question about it. But you're right, real public policy on a day-to-day basis in terms of what's going on, about media control and structure, about possibly what's going to happen with the any kind of tax reform, things like that. Those are big issues that need to be mobilized around also and need to be worked on. And again, I think one of the things that people have to be thinking about is what is that overarching message, overarching alternative to offer? Because again, my criticism, and I've seen this too many times in my lifetime already, is that the Democrat strategy sometimes is to say, well, when people come back to their senses, they'll vote Democrat. That's not a strategy. It isn't a strategy. Yeah.
Hillary Clinton's message, I thought, was anti-Trump, and that did not work.
Oh, yeah.
Clearly. What would you say might be the message? Because I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
The Democrats have to have a message that resonates with people, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah. First of all, I was going to say, if I could figure out what it is, I'd be working on Madison Avenue helping to craft. I mean, clearly, pardon me? I'm getting the hook in a minute. I can see it coming here. I mean, clearly, I think, I still think it's a message about economic populism. I still think at the end of the day, it's a message that talks all about the belief that most of us still want to be able to live the American dream, still want to be able to succeed at the end of the day. That people, people want to be able to get up in the morning, go to work, send their kids to school, they want to play by the rules and feel like they can actually succeed in life or something like that. Now, I don't know how to make that sound really exciting or something like that. But it's about talking about the gaps between the rich and the poor. It's about making sure that those who are least advantaged in our society are helped and taken care of. Again, bringing it back local at this point. I think about like the Minneapolis race or something like that for mayor. Is that in Minneapolis, on one level, in St. Paul, in some level too, I think the races really ought to revolve around what? They ought to revolve around what? Equity, around fairness. They ought to be revolving around the issue that we've got enormous gaps between the north side of Minneapolis, and the other parts. And how do we sort of, build linkages? So I don't know how to craft the message, in terms of doing it. But that's where I think the Democrats have to go and recognize the fact that, guess what? That a lot of the Democratic policies for the last 25 to 30 years haven't really dealt with working class America, haven't helped a lot of average people. I mean, back in 2000, I know, this will be my last comment here. I'm getting the hook here. I know, I'm getting the hook. Okay, so, Susan, how many of you read MidPost? Okay. Susan Albright used to be at the Star Tribune. She's now the editor, managing editor at MidPost. I love this story. Is that in 2010, when the Democrats are getting slaughtered, I'm working Care 11. I know Susan for years. And at like 10 minutes after midnight, Susan sends me an email, says, David, I know you're awake. I need from you by 5 a.m. in the morning a 700-word essay to print that morning on why Obama lost. And she said, ends by saying, and I know you'll have it for me by that time. Like, so, if anybody knows Susan, you'll know, like, when she asks you, you do it. Okay,
Why Obama lost?
Pardon me?
Why Obama lost?
Why, no, this is 2010. This is 2010. Why the Democrats did so badly in 2010. That's what I meant to say. So, why the Democrats got slaughtered in 2010. And part of what I wrote back then is something still true to this day, is that what the Democrats did was to take sort of what I call a wait strategy. For example, we bailed out the banks in 2009, but didn't bail out the homeowners. The unions asked for the passage of the Employee Free Choice Act to modernize the National Labor Relations Act. Obama was, wait, I'll get to that later. People were saying, increase the minimum wage. Wait, we got to deal with something else. And pretty much I said partly why the Democrats got slaughtered in 2010 was that they blew off their core constituencies and said, we got something else to do, to bail out the banks, to bail out Wall Street. You can't do that and win.
To pass the Affordable Care Act, though, too.
They did pass the Affordable Care Act.
Should
did
have
that.
passed single payer.
But this is the point that I would bring up now, is that the Democrats have to acknowledge that there are problems with the Affordable Care Act and say, we need to fix that and here's how to fix it. No, I agree.
They haven't suggested what they would do.
That's exactly the point.
Now they're just like the Republicans.
Exactly.
When it was going on.
Exactly. Anyhow, thank you very much. Anybody catches?
We just have one couple things.
Okay.
First, we want to thank you all really very much for coming. I'm Laura Davis, the chair and co-founder of Stand Up Minnesota. And interesting that Professor Schultz touched on the idea of education, because one of the really important things that we're doing is we've created this SUM Academy, which is our Stand Up Minnesota Learning Center. And this is the second program that we've been able to present related to education. And so what we'd really like from all of you is if you can grab a card on the way out and write down if there are certain things that you'd be interested in learning more about. We can bring in speakers, we can bring in, other folks as talented as Professor Schultz. And we really want to hear from you about what are the kinds of things that interest you. Also, if you're not on our email list, please, on the way out, check with someone at the table to be sure that we have all of your contact information, and hopefully you're following us already on Facebook, Stand Up Minnesota. Thank you all very much.
We do like that.
We like that. Thank you. And thank you again.
All right. Did I pass the audition? Yeah. Does anybody know the reference?
I know.
For part two.
Nobody knows.
Yeah. I agree with you. Well, right there, sitting on a card.
That's the problem with the Democrats. They ultimately are chasing after us.
But what are you going to do? That's how you win elections. It's not an election. Try it.
Set up.
Try it. What?